ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to introduce you, Mr. Thane Maynard.
Ian, thanks. Thanks very much. Thank you all. It's a delight to be here, it really is. We were welcomed like you feel you're welcomed if you go back to your hometown and you visit your church and everybody there knows you and they're excited to see you. And you're nice to do that. That's a wonderful thing about Hamilton. I've been in this room before, but not speaking. I came here to hear a concert, a woman named Susan Werner, maybe a handful of years ago. And she was just terrific. It was a lot of fun. And one of those nights you end up going somewhere. We'd never really known her or her music, but it was terrific. So I know you do great shows here at Fitton. 6 or 7 years ago, I know for one of the programs I spoke down in your auditorium, and we've had other zoo folks come too. So Fitton Center is a great resource for this community, obviously. If you have the Beatles one end and Dizzy Gillespie the other, and a zoo storyteller in between, it's a good week. The big box does not have Fiona in it, so I'm sorry. I'm sorry if anybody thought it was, but she's up to 550 pounds. And so she'd be hard to move. She'd be hard to move, but she is doing well, and her mother is doing well. This won't be surprising to you that to the keepers that work every single day with animals, whether that's elephants or birds or hippos, those animals are like their children. They know them the best. They know their personalities, their moods. They literally know if they catch a cold. When they go out of town, most keepers call. They might or might not call their spouse or ask about their kids, but they call the zoo and ask about their animals, and they care deeply about them. And so, of course, animals live and die, and the passing of Henry's hardest on them. It's a group of great keepers. It happens to be almost all young women. Women have taken over the zoo business. When I started at the Cincinnati Zoo in 1977, this will sound like, it's around the Civil War. We had 97, I was the 97th employee. The only reason I got a job is Procter & Gamble had funded to build an education center that had never been done at a zoo. We had 5 classrooms and a chance to do all kinds of things. They needed some people to come help teach programs. So by good luck and right place at the right time, I got a job. But I was the 97th employee, and I kid you not, of the 97, 1 female. And it was the director's secretary, who had to be pretty tough because the director was really a bear. Now, the zoo's the same zoo, and we have the same, certainly, kinds of animals, if not the same exact ones. But, we're a little bigger. We're about 250 employees. But zoos are small businesses. And as interest in joining zoos has gone way up through generations of people taking zoo camp and all those programs, it's a hard field to break into because it's still small. But you'll be glad to know that well more than 50% of Cincinnati Zoo employees now are female, including 2/3 of keeper staff. Nationwide, both veterinarians in private practice and in zoos, the majority are female. So girls rule in the animal business, yeah. But everybody at the Cincinnati Zoo cares deeply about animals. Sometimes folks will say, well, when you run a zoo, are you scared of animal rights activists? Do you worry about it? And the truth is, an accredited zoo like ours is in the animal welfare business. So why do I say that? Well, we have 100 professional keepers, almost all of whom have at least 1 degree in biology or zoology, sometimes 2. We have 3 full-time veterinarians that take care of our animals. We have another veterinarian, also with a PhD, who takes care of the animals in our research program, CREW. We have a full-time nutritionist, and so you get the point. We spend a lot of time taking care of animals, and we spend a lot of time worrying about preventative health care. So what's that look like? Well, Jomo, our gorilla, is almost 500 pounds. We've trained him. He'll come up in the back to the bars, and they'll put a wand on his chest just like a human, and they do a cardiac ultrasound. And they look at it over here. Well, you can't do that casually. You need a pro. So there's a very fancy cardiologist from Christ Hospital who comes over and does it. And so we train the gorilla. The gorilla just stands there. And as long as you feed him grapes, he's good. He'll just do it. But when the cardiologist came to do it for the first time, here's Jomo, 500 pounds. Very big. You've probably seen gorillas. Their heads are this big. They have extra big heads because they chew all the time. And that chewing, just like panda bears, they have these great big muscles. And so their heads seem much bigger than you'd expect them to be. Their brains aren't as big as ours, but their heads are gigantic. So he's right there next to this guy, and he's leaning down, and he says to his assistant, "Perhaps you should hold the wand, and I'll look at the video." And so, this 20-year-old assistant comes over, a young woman, and she does it. She's not scared. He was a little scared, but it all works out. Last week, our oldest gorilla, Samantha, some of you might remember this, the zoo's great renaissance began in 1970. And that was with the birth of Sam and Samantha, the first time we ever had gorillas born at Cincinnati Zoo. Since then, we've had a total of 50 born. And we hope to have another one born next year. And it's highly managed. You want to make sure that you're working against inbreeding. But when Sam and Samantha were born, that was a big deal. Well, Samantha's still alive. She's 47. But she had a toothache. So how do you know she had a toothache, right? Because they can't talk, but they could tell she was favoring her and that she was, not eating off that side because the keepers pay so much close attention. Well, you can't, drill and put a filling in a gorilla unless she's knocked out, because even though they're not as tough as the males, they bite you. But we have a man named Dr. Sullivan. He's a dentist here in town, and he comes out and brings a couple of assistants, and he does the fillings or even the root canals on our animals when we need to. So we get a lot of support. We do. And we got a lot of support, as you know, with Fiona. I'm sure you've heard a lot of those stories. When she was about 6 weeks old, it started to look bad. She was born prematurely. They're normally 100 pounds, very robust. They are a precocious animal, meaning unlike humans, that when humans are born, we're helpless. When a hippo or other hoofed animals are born, they're raring to go. So in the wild, they're born underwater. They nurse underwater. They climb on their mom's back. And of course, she was just there laying in the hay and looked like a deflated football. No one had ever raised a premature hippo before, but we got after it. And about 6 weeks in, just like can happen with a human premature baby, she started to lose weight. She was getting dehydrated. She had diarrhea. And in humans, the solution is you got to put in an IV. You got to give her some fluids because you don't want to be dehydrated at any age, but especially as a premature infant. Well, I don't know if you've ever looked at the physique of a hippo, but it's hard to hit a vein on a hippo. They're fat all over, right? So you can see our veins. You can't see a hippo vein. So literally, the veterinarians were like, I don't know what we're going to do. And she was going downhill, and a keeper said to me the following Monday that when she left on Friday, she was crying because she thought she was saying goodbye. Because there'd been a lot of effort put in with Fiona. She had laid on the floor in a heated room with heated floors, actually the bathroom in the back of the hippo barn, the warmest room in the building. And people laid with her and kept her warm overnight. I mean, it was really something. And someone from our marketing department who has a little child who had spent a number of weeks at Children's Hospital in Cincinnati said, well, the time they had a hard time hitting her veins because she'd had so many IVs, they called in these specialized nurses, like a SWAT team called the Vascular Access Team. Let's call them. Now, normally, I can tell you, our vets do not like everybody else's ideas. They just please. Because they hate it when I go somewhere, like say I was here and I meet a physician and the physician says, well, you might be giving too much progesterone to your rhinos. And they're like, would you quit talking to doctors about what we're doing here? But they were desperate with Fiona, and they said, all right, we'll call them and see if they can get this team over there. So these two nurses show up, full of swagger, and say, get out of the way. We've never seen a vein we can't hit. And they open this little kit, and they have a little teeny ultrasound wand, and it looked like a river system. They took a little gun and went, boop, and hit a vein, ready. They wrap her all up and they leave. Before they get back to Children's, which is across the street from the zoo, she pulled it out, right? Because human, newborns, premature newborns don't move around much, but the hippos, they're always thrashing around. So they're like, well, we're not giving up. They came back, put it in again, and sutured it in. And it stayed in there for a week, and we got her fluids, and she's gained weight every day since. So it takes a village to raise baby Fiona, that's for darn sure. So she and BB will be on their own, at least for a while. Eventually we'll get another male, but we'll take it slow on that. But they'll be fine. If you come to see them, just like in nature, when they are resting, they tend to sleep right next to each other. In nature, they're all piled like wood on one another. But if you've seen her when she's awake, she is a big ham. She tends to be very active and come right up to the glass. She does a photo bomb. If she knows someone's taking a picture, she'll go, boop, and here comes Fiona. So she's been a wonderful thing for the Cincinnati Zoo. And I'll be honest, a great antidote to last year. Last year, you might remember Harambe. The zoo and their director got our butts kicked for about 12 months on social media. I learned people are mean. I was quoted in the paper saying I'm too old for Twitter because there's evidently no filter and people are just mean. But Fiona turned that around, and we've had a huge response. I was in the country this last spring of Benin, which is in West Africa, near Nigeria, the official middle of nowhere. I'm sitting there at this table, and someone sees my Cincinnati Zoo hat in Benin, West Africa, and they say, "Isn't that where baby Fiona's from?" I'm like, man alive, yeah, I think, at least for 2017, she's the most famous animal in the world. Well, does anybody here ever listen to public radio? All right, well, for 30 years, thank you, for 30 years I've done a little show called the Second Naturalist. And it's a lot of fun to do, and there's a lot of things said about it. Some are nice. I get a few critics. You know, you always hear from experts. If you boil anything down to 90 minutes, or 90 seconds rather, you'll never get everything in there. But the definitive statement on my radio show was by my daughter, who's now 28. But when she was about 8, somebody called at my house, and I could tell they said something about my radio show, and completely without guile, she said, "Oh, it's not that big a deal. It's the same story every day. He just changes the names of the animals so it sounds different." And there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that. Animals, thank goodness, are all pretty well built on the same plan. You probably know there's about 50,000 types of vertebrates, mostly fish, but then, you know, some birds and mammals, amphibians, etc. And those 50,000 with backbones, including us, are almost all built on the exact same framework, right? Even a whale, even a teeny 1-inch bat, central nervous system built to be quadrupeds. Some lost their legs, like snakes and whales. So my little radio show. The reason I ask if you listen, I thought we should have a pop quiz. At the zoo, we do trading cards, like baseball trading cards, but since the zoo's having a better year than the Reds, these are endangered species. And I'm not kidding, the zoo's on target to have more than 1.9 million guests this year. That's saying something. And some of that's Fiona, some of that's weather, and some of that's that we're the zoo for Hamilton and Middletown and Dayton, all the way to Lexington, Kentucky, towns that don't have zoos, we're their zoo. In fact, one of our big donors over the years has been the Kettering Foundation out of Dayton. And I don't know if any of you ever met Virginia Kettering, but when she was alive, she had a charming little old lady's accent. And someone said to her once, "Mrs. Kettering, why doesn't Dayton have a zoo?" And she said, "Oh, we have a zoo. It's 45 miles from here down in Cincinnati." And I said, "Bless you, that's right." Anyway, so some pop quiz. I'll hand these out to Mara, who works with me, and she can make sure they get passed to whoever. Don't yell it out, because we don't want to have a fight over our cards. So this is a good one. This species is making a comeback. When I moved to Ohio in '77, there were 0 nests of this animal, and today they nest right here near Hamilton on the Great Miami River. Bald eagle, that's right. That's Sam, our bald eagle. We fly him at the Reds game 6 times a year. We fly him twice a day in our bird show. And he was rescued up in Michigan where he hit a high tension wire and broke his wing, but he can fly. And the comeback of the eagle is not a small thing. The reason it came back are very important things like the Endangered Species Act of 1973, the Clean Water Act, cleaning up the rivers, whether it's the Great Miami, the Little Miami, the Ohio, means there's more fish on top and there's better health for eagles. But that's not why it matters. You know why it matters is down in Cincinnati, I drink out of the Ohio River. So I'd rather live in a river where eagles and fish can live than live in one where it catches on fire, like in 1969 in Cleveland. All right, here's another endangered species making a comeback. These are all animals we have at our zoo, so to narrow the world. Largest animal in Florida, bigger than a bear. Florida manatee, past one way back there. Florida manatee. We just sent 2 of our manatees back on DHL. Some people don't know that manatees can fly, but ours flew on a great big 747. And our big one, Betsy, went back to Homosassa Springs where she was born. Not everything works according to plan. She came to Cincinnati 7 years ago to go to fat camp. She was too big because they'd been feeding her too much down there. But where we live at the zoo, all the manatees were together, and it was hard to put her on a diet without the others, and she was so big and bossy, she ate everybody's lettuce. And so she gained 300 pounds, and we finally gave up and sent her back to Florida. And we sent another one back too, and now we've got 3 young boys. And so you got to come see them. They're super duper cute. If it wasn't for Fiona, you'd know about some of these other animals, right? But she's sort of eclipsed everybody. But we've got 3 little males that are a year old, and they'll probably be at the zoo for 2 years, grow up till they're big enough to release back where they were orphaned. Manatees have a hard time because they move in slow motion. And I grew up in Central Florida, and bass boats used to be little putt-putt boats. And now they go faster than my Subaru. And there didn't used to be jet skis, and man, jet skis are very tough on manatees because they're so maneuverable, manatees can't possibly figure out how to get out of the way. So why do they always get in trouble? Manatees are one of the only marine mammals, they and the dugongs, who live in the water their whole life. You know, if you think of seals and walruses and sea lions, they're born on land, they get up and sleep on land. Manatees don't do that, they're always in the water. So they're always in shallow water. They don't want to go out where it's 100 feet deep because if they have to sleep, they're going to never get back up. So they're always in that shallow area where marinas are and docks are and boats are and people are. So there's wildlife-human conflict, basically. Let's see, this is an easy. Slowest animal at the zoo? Someone over there raised their hand. That's Mo, short for slow Mo. He's our two-toed sloth. They're a neat animal. Here's a good one. This is a double question. Largest primate in the world, both species and gender. Largest primate in the world. There you go. He raised his hand. What? There you go. A male silverback gorilla. That's Jomo. He's our breeder. I won't ask it as a question because everybody'd want a card, but the reason that the males are bigger than the females is not to fight off jaguars. They don't live there. It's not to fight off leopards. Because if a leopard from the Congo jumped into a troop of gorillas, they could grab a baby, but by the time it got out, those gorillas would grab it, and that'd be the end of that leopard. So they know living in a group protects them. That's how people made it out. You know, everybody started out a long time ago in Africa. Everything there tried to eat something our size, right? The lions, the leopards, the wild dogs, hyenas. But if you live in a group, you've got a lot of early warning system and safety. Now, that part worked for them, so why is this male so big? He's big for competition. He wants to fight off other males. You know, you'll hear sometimes people say, oh, my boss is like a silverback. He's so tough. Well, you may not know this about primate behavior, but these tough males, they're tough because they're anxious and they're nervous. And they're nervous another male's going to come and take their territory and take their girlfriends and kick their butt. They hate that part. And so that's why you'll always see primates, all the females and the subordinates are picking on the big one. Let me take these ticks off you. I'll groom you. It's okay, boss. Everybody relax. And you've seen that behavior where you work. I know you have. That's not new. That's not new. All right, here's one. This isn't just the zoo. This is the world. Fastest animal in the world. There you go. She raised her hand. That's Sarah, the cheetah, also called Sahara. She set, I'm not kidding you, in 2012, the all-time land speed record ever recorded, 61 miles an hour. It was 2 weeks before the Summer Olympics, and National Geographic came, and they set up this stainless steel runner for the camera so they could keep up. They were trying to get high-definition, slow-motion footage of cheetahs running. They had tried that in Namibia in southern Africa. They tried that in the Serengeti. They tried it with captive cheetahs in South Africa. Very hard to get. The reason it worked for us, our zoo invented having cheetahs run after a lure. There's only a couple of zoos that do that. It started at our zoo. They also now do it at San Diego Safari Park because they stole away 2 of our cheetah trainers. The reason it's hard to get cheetahs to do it is there's one thing that cheetahs do. You know, you think what cheetahs do is run. No, what cheetahs do is they're lazy. That's what they're good at. They like to sleep under a tree. If you go to Africa, you see a cheetah, almost always they're sleeping under a tree. When it's time to hunt, they'll run, but they don't just run around for, no good reason. So we've got to train them and almost trick them that if they run, they get a special treat. Sometimes that's the cheetah equivalent of hamburger, just sort of ground up meat. Sometimes it's a super duper treat, which is a rabbit. They really like rabbits. But by knowing they're going to get a really good treat, they'll run for you. But we have to do it every day, even on off days. We take them sometimes even out in the country at our breeding farm and run them. So Geographic came and they ran this deal to record them. It took them 5 days of 8 runs per day. We had 4 cheetahs that ran at the time. We ran them each twice a day for 5 days until they finally got what they wanted. Because cheetahs don't just take off and run like Usain Bolt, fastest human runner ever. They used that same equipment to record him 2 weeks later in London. Just so you know how slow he is, he ran 100 meters in 9.6 seconds. Sarah ran it in 5 seconds. Anyway, because they sort of run and lunge, it took them a lot of times to get the camera next to them, but it's terrific footage. If you go online and just look up slow motion cheetah footage or National Geographic cheetah, you'll get to it, and you'll know it's it, because it is the darndest thing in super slow-mo of these things running. It took a lot to do it. I didn't know what it took to do something for National Geographic. They hired the Loveland Fire Department to be on with us, on stand with a big nozzle with a water truck, and they sprayed on the grass so that when it ran, it had a little sparkly light coming off of it. They hired a great big lighting company with these big booms to, even though it was broad daylight, to provide extra light to make it just so. It was a production and a half, I'll tell you, but we got it, and she set that record. A friend of mine who's a paleontologist from the Museum Center, Glenn Storrs, who's an expert on dinosaurs, says 61 miles an hour is faster than paleontologists think even really fast dinosaurs like velociraptors ran. So the reason for that, you probably know how nature works. Cheetahs, as they evolved, and their predecessors lived right here in North America and chased things like the pronghorned antelope. In Africa, they're chasing other really fast antelope like the Thompson's gazelle. If you're going to chase something that nearly runs 60 miles an hour, you better be able to run 61 miles an hour. In the case of velociraptors, they only needed to run faster than what they were going to eat. And they weren't quite that fast, but I'm sure if you've seen Jurassic Park, it was plenty dangerous. All right, now the questions are getting harder. That's the way it goes. You're headed into the master's degree program. The least known of the 5 great apes. There's 5 great ape species. We talked about gorillas. Of course, people are apes, so we got 3 left. The least known. A gibbon is a lesser ape. That's a good point, but not a great ape. Not a gibbon. They come from Zaire. Yeah. There you go, right there. Come on. From the Democratic Republic of Congo, the bonobo. They used to be called the pygmy chimpanzee. As they say, they are the left bank ape. They live on the left side of the Congo River in a real isolated population in places like the Ituri Forest and near species like okapi, but a fascinating creature. They genetically are very closely related to us, but behaviorally they're not. They live in small groups and they're very friendly. They groom on each other. They actually have sex all the time to calm everybody down, and they don't fight very much. Very unfortunately, my good friend Jane Goodall explained in her early work, common chimpanzees are actually a lot like people. We live in big groups and they're mean as hell. Oh my gosh, they fight, and the males love to fight. They invented war. If a lone male chimpanzee is found by other males, they'll kill him right away. It's a territorial thing. The chimps are tough. And if you ever hear of somebody's got a pet as a chimp, you should not go to their house. Chimps are dangerous. But let's see, let's do one more and then we'll get an animal out. This animal's one the zoo is very famous for. The rarest animal in the world. We're the only zoo that ever figured out how to breed them. And we took our last 2 and white tiger's a good answer. We got the very last of the white tigers at our zoo. We're not breeding them anymore, but they're living out their life there. Nope, this is an endangered species from Indonesia. Yeah, there you go, the Sumatran Rhino. In 1990, 6 American zoos, big zoos, San Diego, the Bronx Zoo, the LA Zoo, Brookfield Zoo in Chicago, Cincinnati Zoo, brought in 6 pairs of Sumatran rhinos. And that was a task and a half. They had to go to the island of Sumatra, find the little game trails, dig holes in the ground, cover them up, and hope that you catch a rhino in there. And of course, they catch everything but a rhino, but eventually they caught these rhinos and brought them here. Very bold move. The goal was to do what had been done in captivity with the California condor, right? All the condors were extinct in the wild. They bred them up. It's been a big success at San Diego Zoo and LA Zoo. There's more than 300 California condors flying in the wild today, and they're still working with them. But for that, they wouldn't have made it. So that was the hope. Let's do that with Sumatran rhinos. The trouble is nobody knew how to take care of them because no one had ever had them. So slowly, our zoo learned though they'll eat hay, they don't metabolize. They had to eat trees. Now, I don't see a ficus tree in here, but a lot of places you'll see those ornamental ficus trees. Those are from Asia. A fig tree, similarly, with the big broad leaves. We learned that we could keep ours alive, which we did for a long, long time, by feeding them Asian trees. The trouble was they eat 100 pounds a day each. And you can't grow that many of tropical trees. There aren't enough greenhouses in Ohio to do that. So we had to import them every day on Delta Dash. At our peak, we had 4 Sumatran rhinos, and then 3, and eventually 2. And that's 100 pounds a day per, anyway. When our last male left, we sent our last 2, they're living in Sumatra now. It was $125,000 a year just to import the ficus and fig leaves for him to eat. That was even more than it cost to send my daughter to college for a year, so I know it was a lot. Anyway, the good news is they are over there and they're thriving. They're at a place called the Sumatran Rhino Sanctuary on the edge of a national park. The oldest of the 2, Andalis, first one ever born in captivity, has a wild girlfriend, and he's had 2 babies. And they think there are less than 100 of these animals in the whole wide world, so having 2 more is a good thing. His little brother, Harapan, has not found a girlfriend yet, but he's working on it, so we're hoping that'll work. The majority of the world and conservationists have given up on Sumatran rhinos. If you typed in on your computer, most endangered animal in the world, or animals you can kiss goodbye, the first thing to pop up would be Sumatran rhino. Because they live on an island, everybody's poor, there's an awful lot of people, and rhinos are super duper valuable from poachers for their horn. But I believe, and the Cincinnati Zoo believes, and we're still involved and committed, that that species can be saved in that national park by protecting them with anti-poaching units and by working with them to try to help our scientists go over and still work with folks, try to get the ones that they have in the protected area of the park to breed, as well as to get others in other protected areas. So we'll see. There are a lot of animals that live in isolated populations today. The mountain gorillas in the Virunga Mountains, which is a very finite park, but it's the oldest park in Africa. And when Diane Fossey went there to study them in 1970, there were only 250, and today there's 950 by protecting them. But the reason that it works, I've been there, I've been very fortunate to be there. There's self-interest of the people that live around there, because tourists come and they stay in lodges and they eat food and they pay tips for people to help carry all the junk of this slippery mountain, and it's a win-win. It's the reason people go to Rwanda. So where we can, whether it's on the edge of Yellowstone or it's on the edge of Rwanda, we need to have a way that local people benefit from wildlife. We brought some wildlife, and I mentioned Mara. She's going to get out the biggest owl in the world and bring it around. This is Caspian. Caspian is a Eurasian Eagle Owl. Some people love this animal so much they have had it tattooed on their body, life size. That's how much people love animals. I'm telling you, I haven't seen any Fiona tattoos, but I guarantee you there are any. Did anybody hear of a Fiona tattoo? No. Okay. Well, somebody probably would. Anyway, this is Caspian. Mara works in our visitor engagement program called Wild Encounters, so that when you come to the zoo, you don't just see animals in exhibits, you'll see animals out. You'll see people walking flamingos, you'll see people walking through with owls. Caspian doesn't love to be petted, but you get a big look at him, and you can certainly get a picture. They fill the same niche in the forest where they live in Eurasia as the great horned owl here does, but they're just a lot bigger. They look a lot like a horned owl, but a big female weighs twice what our horned owls weigh. While she takes that around, I'll tell a little bit about one of the great joys of my career. I've been very fortunate over time to work with Jane Goodall. Jane, as you know, is the most beloved and trusted person in the history of wildlife conservation, and actually one of the most beloved and trusted people anywhere. And she came to Cincinnati in 2002 to give a talk for the zoo at the Centaur Center at Xavier. And we were talking afterwards because she spoke about the idea that so many times she sees people that are losing hope. Because if you read the paper every day, let me tell you, there's bad news. And it's not just out of Washington. There's bad news out of conservation, melting glaciers, disappearing species. I mean, it's every day. And of course, the irony is there's good news too. Just in the past few minutes, I mentioned the comeback of the bald eagle, the comeback of the California condor. There are many other species, peregrine falcons. If I had been standing here 30 years ago, I'd say nobody here had seen a peregrine falcon. You can see them every day today, right? They're not common, but You can see them down in Hamilton County. They nest right on the PNC Bank building every spring. Thanks to people working hard at it, species are making a comeback. It's not always without conflict, right? There's gray wolves in the northern Rockies, which sounds great here, but if you live out there and go to a bar in Montana and say, you got any wolves around here? There will be an actual fist fight that breaks out, right? Not an argument, but people are hot on that topic. My opinion is it's a good thing we live in a country that is, even though we are so crowded and we are so prosperous, there's still room for predators. And it's a good argument worth having. Anyway, working with Jane Goodall is like nothing else. So many people, I believe, and that you learn about that are famous, it's a lot of spin. You know, they have an agent or they have an ad agency, and that is not true with Jane. Jane is 98 pounds, a vegetarian from rural England, and a remarkable woman. When our book came out, it's called Hope for Animals in Their World, and we interviewed and visited dozens of conservationists who work with very endangered species. People like Carl Jones, who lives on the island of Mauritius and refused to give up. He was down to less than 10 Mauritius kestrels. He was down to less than 6 pink pigeons. But he had those, and he captured them, and just like the California condor, he refused to give up. In both species, there are up over 200 birds, and they're flying in the wild again. While that's not perfect, it's better than them being gone, because as we learn more and more through all kinds of reproductive research, if a species still exists, it is possible for those numbers to continue to grow, and there's a way to maximize genetic diversity. And our zoo plays a big role in that with our CREW program, our Center for Conservation and Research of Endangered Wildlife. So we spent time with dozens of conservationists, and it really was a gas, because a few of them were really well educated, you know, went to Harvard or whatever. A few of them even, you know, seemed to have like a regular job, but they did this on the side. Most of them were broke. It was just a labor of love. Some of them live in a tent. Some of them live in incredibly dangerous places in the world. But the one trait that they all had, all of them, obstinate, they would not take no for an answer. People would say, oh, that'll never work. Oh, you're wasting your time. Oh, they didn't even respond. They gave him a look like Jane does when people try to tell her what to do, and she looks at him, she's super polite. But her look means, I've met people like you, but I'm busy and have work to do, and it's time for you to go. And if you know folks from England, you probably know they are incredibly polite. They might think it's time for you to go, they just don't say it that way. But when our book came out, I was fortunate for 2 weeks to go on a book tour with her. And I realized there's a thing that even she calls the Jane effect, which is, we sat there and nobody gave a hoot about talking to me. I just sat there, but they wanted to meet her. No one, not one person says, gosh, Dr. Goodall, thank you for your seminal work studying primate behavior. Thank you for unlocking the world of primates like chimpanzees and teaching us that they use tools and they eat meat. Nobody had an interest in that. They just came and wanted to talk to Jane. They would talk about their dog. They would talk about that their mother died. It was like going to the mountaintop to talk to, I don't know who, the Dalai Lama. And after the first night when we're leaving, she said, yeah, I don't get it either, but I think what it is, there are very few people left that people really trust. And Jane Goodall is one of them. She is the real thing. So it's been certainly a joy to work with her. All right. Mara's going to get out another animal, which happens to be my favorite animal. This animal that's coming out is my favorite animal. I'm going to put this here. I'm going to put this in. It's not a snake. That'd be terrible. We clear the room at 1:35. Oh, here we go. There we are. In a minute, Mara will bring this around, but I wanted you to see, I grew up in Central Florida, where 50 years ago, my friends and I would go out at night with big flashlights, and we would shine gators. And it's hilarious to look back, because the only reason I'm still here is there weren't very many gators. They were at the nadir of their population. They had been poached out, they'd been used for soup, they'd been used for golf bags. Ever since the Civil War, when folks came back and they were broke, they started using wildlife skins and feathers for trade. And gators went down and down and down. And so as a boy, for instance, in the town I grew up in, Winter Park, Florida, there's a bunch of lakes. In town, there were 0 gators. You couldn't find a gator if you had to. But my best friend lived way out in the country down a dirt road, and on a far edge, a swampy edge of his lake, there would be some gators. to think that, I am not joking, when we were 9 years old, he and I would take off with some frozen hamburgers and some junk, and people didn't even use mosquito repellent then. It was crazy, but we took off and we'd be gone for days. I remember paddling off, and his parents would wave from the dock, and they'd have no idea where we were. And we would get in the water at night and try to catch gators, and very rarely did we do it. It was a very bad idea then. It's a terrible idea today because they're back in huge numbers. But as the years passed and finally I had kids, I called my mother one day and I said, I can't believe you let us just paddle off to the other side of a lake and we'll see you in a few days. Literally, that's what it was. And she said, Thane, parents drank a lot in the 60s. That's just the way it was. And it was laissez-faire. If parents today, some of you have kids, some of you have grandkids, if parents today raise little children the way they were raised when most of us were little children, someone would call children's services. They're like, you can't do this. No. You got to know where that kid is. Anyway, but I survived it, mostly because their population had been low. But this is Cruncher. Cruncher's a 1-year-old baby American alligator. When they're young, they have some stripes. And scientists at the University of Florida have proven that helps them hide in the grasses and the reeds. As they get older, they're black all over, and that's actually a type of sunblock for them. Once in a while, in Louisiana, they've discovered some albino gators, and if they stay in the wild, they live very short lives because they die of skin cancer. So the black is a little bit of a sunblock, but you gotta look at Cruncher up close. Now, I know some of you are saying, did this guy talk years ago and there was a Cruncher about that same size? Cruncher is a bit like Shamu. If you go to SeaWorld, it's always Shamu, and you're like, where'd the other Shamu go? And they're like, well, it's on vacation in San Diego. Yeah. So we can't bring an adult alligator, but we brought this one. In our Manatee Springs exhibit, we have a female named Lucy, and she's the biggest female I've ever seen. She's 9 feet long. You don't want to grab Lucy, that's for sure. She'd like to grab you, but I don't know for sure what Lucy weighs, but if you wanted me to guess, I'd say 300 pounds. Yeah, she's big, and males can get way bigger than that. The males can be longer, and this is true of alligators and crocodiles. As they get older, the males get bigger and bigger and bulkier, and they get really fat. Fortunately, even today, with gators having made a huge comeback, so what's a huge comeback? Well, if you go down from basically South Carolina all the way around to Texas, and at night go out where there's some water, usually not the ocean, but at a golf club or a park or lake, and shine a flashlight, you'll see red eyes shining back because they are back. There's more than 3 million wild alligators today. It's sort of funny that it's my favorite animal, and I always said that when I was coming up, because when you think of working with baby Fiona and working with, red pandas and elephants, people are like, oh, wow, an alligator. But, it just represents my misspent youth. But anyway, but also you should know gators aren't typically that dangerous to humans. There are stories, legitimate stories of people being killed or people being hurt, but usually they don't bother people. We're not really on their menu. We're kind of big for them. Now, Nile crocodiles in East Africa and Southern Africa, humans are on their menu because people evolved there, and we were right there with them saying, well, they look tasty, right? So Nile crocodiles have killed and eaten a lot of people. But the all-time most dangerous reptile is the saltwater croc. It lives in the Indian Ocean all the way to Australia. I need to make sure you know this. If you go to Australia and there is a sign that says, do not swim, even though it's a resort and it's the most beautiful place you've ever been, do not swim. Those saltwater crocs are tough. They can bite right through the side of a boat. They're very big, twice the size of a gator, 10 times tougher. And everything they eat's bigger than us. So, yeah, people get killed by saltwater crocs all the time, so be careful. Now, other places where you can swim, like the Great Barrier Reef, et cetera, the crocs aren't out there, but right on the shore, be careful, yeah. You got to be brave to be a surfer from Australia, I'm telling you. They got great white sharks, they've got saltwater crocs. It's a wild time. Anyway, so I'll tell you a story. When you're involved with any nonprofit, I bet the same thing's true, probably the Fitness Center, many other institutions here in Hamilton. Part of what you end up doing is raising money. And there's a rule, a sacred rule. No matter what happens, don't tick off your biggest donor, right? That's pretty good. Yeah. And that's if you're at a church, anywhere. Well, the zoo's biggest donor 15 years ago, when she passed away, was an infamous woman who loved animals named Marge Schott. And Marge Schott loved our zoo. She did. But she passed away, and their family had not yet organized a foundation and a way to be involved. They since have, the Marge and Charles Schott Foundation, and they're very big supporters of the zoo. But at the time, it was just a vacuum. So my boss said to me, you knew Marge, so you go out and you find her family, and you get them over here. So her family, blessedly, are low maintenance, no demand, salt of the earth. But I couldn't find them. So I asked around and asked around and asked around, and finally her youngest sister, Bobby Unaware, is now very involved with the zoo, was working at Talbot's, which is a dress shop in this area called Rookwood, right in town. And I said, well, I can't seem to reach anybody, so I'll go over there. I've met women in red dresses, let's go. So I go over there, and I say, is Bobby Unaware here? And I talked to her, I said, you gotta come to the zoo, I knew your sister, come on. So she came over. We're going around the zoo, 2002. We're in a golf cart, we're looking at all sorts of things, and we go over to the gorillas and we see Jomo. Now, Jomo's our big male I mentioned. He was brand new, he had 5 girlfriends, he was there to breed and have a family, and everybody loves this story. So I said, Bobby, you're gonna love this story because these gorillas are so closely related to us, Bobby, that Jomo, he's got a cholesterol problem, he takes Lipitor, the same Lipitor humans take, the same pill, right? He's trained, Bobby, he puts his arm out, they put a blood pressure cuff on him, and they test his blood pressure because gorillas, just like humans, can get heart disease, all kinds of. He's on blood pressure medicine, same stuff we take. He just takes more because he weighs 500 pounds. But Bobby, you're going to love this one. He's got 5 girlfriends, and of course he mates with them all, but we don't want them all pregnant, so they're on birth control pills. They're on human birth control pills. Everybody loves this. They get one every day in a spoonful. This is true today. In a spoonful of yogurt, everybody gets a birth control. Madge gets hers, and Samantha gets hers, et cetera. Well, here's this 70-year-old, 5-foot-tall Catholic gal looking at me with her hands on her hips, and she says, well, what does the church say about you and these birth control pills? And she is dead serious. And I am thinking, this is it. I may be fired tomorrow. So I called a friend of mine who's a priest, and I start to explain it to him, and he starts laughing. And I said, what are you laughing about? And he said, well, I've never been asked to speak for the Vatican before, but I can assure you my hands are full. The church doesn't want to go anywhere near animal birth control. You can do whatever you want. And she said, well, that's good enough for me. And on we went. And they've been very fortunate to support the zoo in a big way. And we carry on. So you never know the trouble you can get in. The good news, though, I think I did mention, is we've been slated to breed gorillas and hopefully have a baby next year, which would be fun. Breeding endangered species in zoos is not just a thing, breed them if you got them, like say at a dairy farm, but very carefully we manage the populations because other than the Sumatran Rhinos I mentioned that came from Sumatra and the Manatees that came from Florida, all the other animals in zoos are born in zoos. So there's a great interest in making sure that you're being very careful of who breeds with who. And we have one more animal, a really fun one. And we're going to have maybe a question and answer here in a minute, but this is a screaming hairy armadillo. What's this one's name? This is Bonnie, named after Bonnie Raitt. Now, there's 20 species of armadillo. The smallest is called a fairy armadillo. It's the size of an old cell phone. They live in Argentina. They have a little tail. This is one of the medium size. And then there's the giant armadillo. The giant armadillo is bigger than that big box. It's about 200 pounds, digs a hole 3 feet in diameter. But these guys live in Brazil. They're called hairy armadillos because you can see they have more hair than the other species and whiskers. And they have, the screaming is they will scream. Their mouth will open real wide, and if they get real excited, they'll scream. We don't want her to particularly scream. The only time I've seen her scream is I got her out once. She was running all over the place in our Discovery Forest rainforest area. She was having a big time. And when I went to catch her, she was screaming like, ah, stop it. But she has a good life at the zoo. I was once camping in the country of Suriname in northern South America. It was back when I was turning 40 and I wanted to go to the wildest place in the world. And the wildest place in the world was the Congo. But as you might have heard, over the past 25 years, there's been a big war in the Congo, so I didn't go there. So instead, I talked to pals of mine that are involved with a group called Conservation International. We went camping down in Suriname, which is the wildest place in South America. It's north of the Amazon. we're camping at night. We're hanging in hammocks. And people hear rustle, rustle, rustle. And somebody says, what do you think that is? I said, it's an armadillo. They're like, how do you know that? I said, I grew up in Florida. I know what an armadillo sounds like. So we take a flashlight. We look. And here is this armadillo, giant armadillo. I kid you not. It looked like a Volkswagen. I'm like, whoa. So we get out of our hammocks. We're going to go take pictures. We're crawling along. And the local guy that was with us said, no, don't get any closer because they're a vector for schistosomiasis, which is a really tough disease, and you don't want to get it. So it's good he said it because one guy we were with was crazy. He was going to climb in the hole after it. So that's the good news. The bad news is my foot must have stuck out of the hammock because I caught falciparum malaria, the kind that gets in your brain. And I was sick. Woo! But a doctor from Brazil named Sylvania Ng, thank goodness, was on staff at Bethesda North Hospital. So after about 2 weeks of my tongue turning black and blood coming out of everywhere, she showed up and said, everybody in Brazil has malaria. Get out of here. And she saved me. So it has a happy ending, as they say. Yeah. Well, I'll say this. Ian was nice to mention that yesterday was my 40th anniversary of working at the zoo. I have been blessed to have a career doing work I'm interested in. And I'm fascinated still by nature as I was when all this started a long time ago. And zoos are a fun place to be. A lot of people have been there a long, long time. So I don't want to go too long. And while Bonnie goes around, if folks have a couple questions either about the zoo or about animals, I'd be happy to answer them. If it's about anything else, I'm a one-trick pony. I only know about the zoo and animals. That's all I've got.
You mentioned you grew up in Florida and how there was few crocodiles when you grew up. Well, now I read about how they're overwhelmed with pythons.
Correct. Yeah, there are many introduced species, frankly, all over the world, such as around here, honeysuckle. Right? You might remember 40 years ago, your woodlots and yards didn't have a lot of honeysuckle, and it's hard to get rid of it now. Bamboo can do the same thing. Well, in places like Florida where it doesn't get doesn't get cold, such as the Everglades, when a species does get let loose, like Burmese pythons, man, they breed unchecked, right? Any introduced species. The Great Lakes has the same problem with zebra mussels. I, for many, many years, have gone up to a part of the Great Lakes up near Traverse City. And you used to go there, and it was perfectly lovely, but the water, was sort of murky. It was sort of what you'd expect. It was fine. You go up there now, it's crystal clear. It looks like the Caribbean. I talked to a friend of mine who's a biologist. He said, well, it's a zebra mussel. There's so many zebra mussels, they're eating up all these things, and it makes it look pretty, but the downside is there's not much in the water, and the fishing's going way down in that part near Traverse. So, introduced species are hard to control, that's for darn sure, because they don't bring their predators with them. Uh-huh.
I even remember 40 years ago it was lamprey eel. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, lamprey eel's a similar thing.
Which kind of did in that era's fishing.
Oh, I know. Yeah, fortunately over time things have a way of moving forward and back, but it's a challenge, no doubt about it. Same thing's true with many other plants. Yes?
Have you talked about sending the rhinos back? How do you do that? By ship, by plane, and
That's a very good question about sending the rhinos back to Sumatra. At the Cincinnati Zoo and most accredited zoos, there's a lot of moving of wildlife around. If it's not a long distance, we might use a truck, right? So if we, for instance, right now have 2 young female giraffes that we're going to eventually, over the next few months, send to other zoos because we don't want them to breed with their dad. So before they're 2 years old, they need to go somewhere else. So we typically try to have them not go too far, and they can go basically in a tall horse trailer. Something like sending an animal all the way to Sumatra, you have to fly them on a plane. And these big freighters are just a gas. We're all used to getting on a big plane. Well, you take a 747 and there's no seats in it. There's none of the fancy, sort of decorative part of it. It's a big tube. It's not as big as this, but it feels about this big. It's a big tube. And, they ship elephants in them. The folks at the zoo in Dallas recently brought back half a dozen elephants and they flew them on a plane. Yeah. So in our rhinos cases, we do build substantial crates, rhino-proof, and they lift them on a big forklift and clip them in, and then the vet and a keeper go with them, and they feed them on the way, and they get there. And so far, so good. We'll see. We're not giving up hope. So why do I say we're not giving up hope? Sorry about that. Some people criticize even my radio show. They'll say, why are you always telling all these happy stories about they discovered a new frog in the rainforest when in fact there's all these problems like climate change? Well, my mission of that show and the mission of the zoo is to try to inspire people to care about wildlife, right? And I deeply believe by telling people hopeful stories of work that can be done or species that are making a comeback is way better than telling them that the world's coming to an end. Partly because the world is not coming to an end, right? The world's gonna be okay. What's at risk is human well-being. And the more we can let people know that, the more people will actually say, well, why don't we have some practical solutions and move forward? And I think there are lots of good models of that. And I think as the chips are getting to be down, we'll get better at solving problems. People are good in a pinch. And it's way too early to declare defeat. So don't believe all the bad news you hear. One more question. Yes, ma'am.
We've watched a lot on Facebook about her handlers and keepers and things. Will Fiona recognize them when they come back?
Sure, that's a very good point. About Fiona, about the way she was raised, you probably know this, but over the years you've started to maybe see almost any animal we can isn't hand-raised by people, isn't bottle-fed, it's raised by their mom. So gorillas used to be bottle-fed in a nursery, now they're raised by their mom, etc. But in the case when it's an emergency, we have to be prepared to do that. So a funny thing that happens in my life is at least once every couple of years, a keeper or curator will come in and say, oh gosh, listen, we're gonna do this special thing with Gladys the gorilla. Don't worry, it won't cost much extra, won't be a lot of overtime. And 60 grand later, we've raised a baby gorilla. Well, a similar thing with Fiona. On the one hand, she's probably the only animal in the world that's ever paid her own bills because she's, they've sold everything from t-shirts to playing cards to beer, all named Fiona. But that said, it was a tremendous amount of work. And there was a lot of bonding, no doubt, between her keepers that she sees every day, 4 or 5 people, and her. And that was when they were holding her and raising her and bottle feeding her and then later swimming with her, just direct contact. So given all that, she certainly knows her keepers and will long term. And there are lots of really poignant zoo stories of that kind of thing where someone, we had a keeper forever at the zoo, 50 years, named Cecil Jackson Sr. And he's passed away now, but his son, Cecil Jackson Jr., runs our elephant program. Well, Sr. used to be our elephant manager. Well, he'd been retired for decades. And he came back one time and walked into the elephant barn and just yelled, Shotzi, come over here. And Shotzi's one of her big females. She walks right over. She knew that voice. She came right over. So yeah, animals do recognize their keepers. There's no doubt about it. And there is a bond. You can be cynical and say that bond is that they feed them. And there's a little bit of truth to that. My dog likes my wife more than she likes me because my wife's the one that feeds him. When I come home and walk up the stairs from, the garage and basement, she kind of looks at me and then looks by me like, is mom back there? So some of it's food driven, but some of it is a bond that really develops over time too. Yeah. I'll tell one last story on Jane Goodall because it's a beautiful part of her early work. She always wanted to work with animals. By just sticking to it, eventually the great paleontologist Louis Leakey chose her and sent her to live on the shores of Lake Tanganyika in 1960 to do a long-term, multi-year study of chimpanzee behavior. And his reason is he wanted to discover what was early man like, and he thought this would be the closest replica. So off she goes. She'd never gone to college. She had a ponytail and a good attitude. He said, you can't go by yourself. So she took her mother. So picture this, 2 English ladies in a pup tent with some canned goods. That's it, right? There was nothing, not a light bulb, not a faucet, nothing. A bunch of chimps and 2 English ladies in a pup tent. After about 3 years, she had developed enough notes, enough detail, and she'd unlocked all of these things that animals do that no one ever had imagined that they do because no one had ever taken that time. So she came back to England and she spoke at the Royal Society. The Royal Society, I'm sure you recall, is perhaps the most venerable scientific forum in the world. It's where Newton, on the same stage, described gravity. It's where Darwin described evolution. Here's Jane Goodall, age 28, never been to college, and the whole audience is men, and the whole audience is from Oxford University and Cambridge University, I mean, the most learned biologists on earth. And she's up there rocking their world with, well, here's what I've discovered about chimpanzees. They have individual characteristics. They have individual moods. This one's name is David Graybeard. This one's name is Flo. These guys are going nuts. They are standing and yelling, "Get out of here. You need to leave right now. What are you doing?" Animals don't have names. Animals don't have personalities. You need to give them a number. You need to write down what they do. Animals operate under instinct, young lady. They do not have free will. Yelling and yelling and yelling and yelling. And you've never even been to school. But they didn't know Jane, right? I've described her, 98 pounds of sprung steel. She just stood there when they were done ranting. She said, "I recognize that the most learned men in animal behavior and ethology are in this room. And I recognize I haven't the schooling you have. But I had a good animal behavior teacher myself." And they're yelling, "Who? Who?" And she said, "I grew up on a farm in Bournemouth, England, and Rusty the farm dog every day, before I got out of bed, showed me what kind of mood he was in, what sort of things he wanted to do. Some days he was up, some days he was down. You will never convince anyone who actually works with animals that they don't have individual traits." And she called him out. And of course, she completely changed the way that scientists all over the world study everything. Even people studying ants have a different perspective than they had in 1960 when she started. So individual people matter, and a program like this is a lot of fun. You guys are very great to have us here from the zoo. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Thane Maynard from the Cincinnati Zoo.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you to the animals as well. Thank you, Laura. We really appreciate it. Fantastic. We've got a little something for you, sir. We have here a gift, Adapt or Die. This is by Lieutenant General Lynch, who spoke here last year. He's a 3-star commanding general of the U.S. Army and a Hamilton boy. And there's an honorarium in there for the zoo as well. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thanks for coming out today. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, Thane Maynard, the Cincinnati Zoo.